I sat through the film and it blew me away. It was so amazing in that there are so many gray areas in this movie. There are no real clear-cut heroes, there are no real clear-cut bad guys. They're all bad, they're all good. I thought, God, this is an awful lot like life. This gritty kind of reality of what life in medieval times must have really been like. I got a call from Mike Medavoy, and he said, I'm sitting in the office with Paul Verhoeven. He said, do you know who Paul Verhoeven is? And I said, well, of course I know who Paul Verhoeven is. He's a brilliant filmmaker. And he said, well, he wants to talk to you about, if you might want to score one of his movies. And I said, well, yeah, I'd certainly like to talk to him about it. He said, come in 3 hours. So, between 4 in the morning and 9:30 in the morning, here I was at Orion in a screening room, and someone came out and they said, Mr. Verhoeven would prefer that you saw the film alone. He doesn't want to influence anything that you might think about the film. And it is also requested that we remove the temp track from the movie so you can see it without any suggestion of what the music might be. I knew right then that I was up against somebody that was, really extraordinary and really understood what the needs of a composer were. I asked him, I said, what of my music attracted you to me? And of course it was Conan. He liked the power, he liked the boldness, he liked the open harmonies, which suggested to him medieval. Paul was working out of Holland. He was still living in Holland at the time. We met, and he kind of talked briefly about the kinds of things that he thought the score should be. And above all, he thought it should be energetic and certainly medieval. There were a couple of instruments that he wanted to use that were special instruments. The hurdy-gurdy, which was a kind of a grinding sound, organ grinder kind of sound, was a legitimate instrument, a real instrument that existed during the period.
Soldiers fight to win the war. Soldiers fight to win the war.
He also wanted it to be large orchestral because he wanted it to be an adventure. And the other serious stipulation that he had for the music was he wanted it to represent a kind of spirituality. He wanted there to be this sense that there were higher forces maybe at work. One of the main characters in the film, his name is Martin, very quickly realizes that this band of thieves and cutthroats that he's leading, they're mercenaries basically, but they're quite taken with some imagery that Saint Martin, their patron saint. There are key moments in the film where there are some images that he capitalizes on. So basically he uses religion to manipulate his politics and his leadership over the group of mercenaries. And I always saw this band of mercenaries as land pirates, really, because a lot of the organization of the thing is very much like shipboard organization, but they're on the land, although they have these covered wagons, like a prairie schooner kind of thing, they're scourging the countryside. It had some very clever things. It had some, used a lot of Da Vinci kind of science and the construction of some of the war machines that are there. But above all, it had a style. It had a stark kind of honesty and a frightening kind of reality to it, which only a European filmmaker could have pulled off. And I was taken by it. And I said, this is it. I really want to do this movie. Then, of course, there's a love story that involves one woman and two men. So we had this question of, all right, do we write love themes for each of the set? But the woman's the same, so should she not have a theme? And then we started that game of, okay, how do we motif this out? And he was very convinced that things needed to be very melodically strong, using a motif as a storytelling device, keep the audience flowing with the film, and to stay in the world in which he's created visually and with the scriptwriter. There's a scene where they discover Jennifer Jason Leigh in a trunk. They've stolen some stuff from a prince. And in it, she hides in this trunk, and they discover her. And there's a rape scene that follows that, and it was one of the most difficult scenes for Paul musically because he didn't want to make it grotesque. What I mean by grotesque is he didn't want it to be gratuitous. So there are a lot of interesting things going on, and he told me that he had tried about 30 or 40 different pieces of music, and he wasn't sure if I'd be able to come up with anything that really could do that, but see what I could do. As it turns out, it's one of his favorite cues in the film. I don't think there's any real difference between a modern score and a period score. I mean, I'm the kind of composer that I try to find the world, no matter what it is. It could be in outer space, or certainly with Red October, it's Russians and Americans, or For Love of the Game, which is baseball. And I try to find something that musically represents that concept. So essentially, I think finding what the concept of a film, what's behind that, and then representing that musically is something that I try to do. Find out what the formal dictates are of the writing and what they are of the vision of the filmmakers. And then by whatever means necessary, represent those things. It's all music. The choices are infinite, and I think they need to be grouped, and they need to be driven by whatever the requirements of the film are. It's a very full-time kind of occupation of the mind, not to mention the physical amount of work that needs to be done. I think there are probably composers who have perhaps teams of writers and teams of orchestrators. I'm not one of those kinds of composers. I guess it's to a fault I'm a micromanager, and I want to be aware of every detail of every aspect of what goes into producing a film score. And that could be, go as far as being aware of how all this equipment in the studio works and taking the time to fix it if it breaks. I have a Steinway grand piano that I've had since I was 7 years old in my home, and occasionally I'll write. Basically, that's where the prime creation comes from. I think the piano inspires me to a major extent. It's like a writer, and in the old typewriters, or even the word processors. Somehow the movement of the fingers, and it becomes a mantra, and it conjures, some sounds or ideas. More and more I'm writing at the computer, and basically these are the sounds that, particularly for modern scores, where they might be more textural, they might be, they may have nothing to do with melodic kinds of content, where it's really more about psychological effect and cluster and musique concrète kind of ideas. That has to be created. I mean, what it is what it is. So it seems kind of silly to abstract it by going off and writing it somewhere else and then bringing it into my studio and realizing it. It's a little more immediate that way. And there are certain kinds of projects that it's very effective for. all in all, it was an amazing experience, because here I was working with a director who was pretty much in absentia for the writing of the score. He would fax me reams and reams of notes, and say concerning this scene and this frame, and it was like very detailed. And then at the end of it all, he would say, on the other hand, if you think any of this is useless, ignore it all. Although I must say Paul's very sophisticated musically, and I think a lot of it has to do with his background. He actually has a PhD in higher mathematics, which leads him to perceive things from so many different angles, I think. I think he can think three-dimensionally a lot easier than most of us. So, really understood the contribution of what a composer can bring to a film if they're unfettered, and demanded that and wanted that. And that was the brilliance of Paul. And it still is to this day. I think he tries to surround himself with people that he knows shares his vision, and that he knows will bring as much to it, and hopefully more, than he does himself. That's hard to do, to bring more than he does himself, let me tell you.